David Whitmore was one of the richest men in the country, but nobody in his mansion knew that he was secretly pretending to be the plumber. He was tired of seeing his autistic son, Ethan, treated like a burden by cold and careless caregivers. So he decided to test the new maid without revealing who he really was. She thought he was just another worker, until one day she did something with Ethan that no one else ever had. And what David saw that day changed everything. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love to know that. David Whitmore lived in a large, quiet estate on the edge of a wooded area. The Whitmore estate was elegant but lonely, filled with long halls, tall windows, and expensive furniture that felt more like museum pieces than home comforts. Ever since his wife Laura had passed away, the house had lost its warmth. And since the birth of his son, Ethan, the silence had only grown heavier. Ethan was 6 years old. He used a wheelchair and rarely spoke. His autism made it hard for him to look people in the eye, and harder still to connect. David had hired more caregivers than he could count, but none of them stayed long. Most treated Ethan like a job, not a person. David had stopped hoping anyone could help his son. He barely left the house anymore. Most days he sat in his private study, reviewing paperwork or staring out the window, wondering if Ethan would ever know what love felt like. But one quiet morning, without telling anyone, he decided to try one last time. He arranged for a new housekeeper to visit the next day, someone who didn't know the mansion, the people, or him. Her name was Maya Williams. She was young, soft-spoken, and carried a calm presence that David noticed immediately, even before she entered. That morning she stood outside the tall iron gate, holding a small brown suitcase. After a nervous breath, she pressed the intercom button. A buzz sounded, and the gate slowly opened. As Maya walked up the stone path, her eyes widened at the sight of the house. The mansion seemed endless, every corner shadowed by luxury and loneliness. When she reached the main door, she was greeted by Mrs. Green, the head housekeeper, an older woman with tidy grey hair and sharp eyes. Mrs. Green was polite but distant, the kind of person who had seen too much and trusted too little. She led Maya inside without much small talk. The entrance hall was wide and quiet. The only sounds were the ticking of a wall clock and the faint echo of their footsteps. Maya followed Mrs. Green to a sitting room where the interview would be held. The room smelled faintly of polish and old wood. Mrs. Green began asking her questions about her experience, her patients, and whether she had ever worked with children who had special needs. Maya answered honestly. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't try to sound perfect. She simply said she wanted to help people and was willing to learn. But what Maya didn't know was that someone else was listening. Behind a nearby wall, pretending to fix a water pipe, David stood wearing a grey work shirt and jeans, a wrench hanging from his belt. Everyone in the house thought he had hired a new plumber. No one suspected that the man checking the sink pressure was actually the owner of the entire estate. From where he stood, David could see through a narrow mirror that worked like a one-way window. He watched Maya carefully, her posture, her tone, the way she reacted when Mrs. Green mentioned Ethan. Most candidates tensed up when they heard special needs, but Maya didn't. She just nodded thoughtfully and asked, "Does he like to be read to?" The question caught David's attention. It wasn't about difficulty. It was about connection. Mrs. Green gave her a long look before continuing. She explained that Maya's main duty would be to help care for Ethan, feeding him, helping him dress, and trying to make him feel safe. She warned Maya that Ethan didn't react well to sudden movement or loud voices. "He doesn't like to be touched without warning," she said firmly. Maya listened closely, taking mental notes. Her face stayed calm, and her eyes were soft with understanding. When the interview ended, Mrs. Green decided to give her a tour. They walked through the main kitchen, past shelves of shining silverware and perfectly arranged dishes. They visited the service room, where laundry was sorted and folded. Then they climbed the wide staircase leading to the upper floor, where sunlight poured through tall windows. "This is Ethan's room," Mrs. Green said, stopping at a door painted a gentle cream color. She didn't open it. "He's resting," Maya nodded quietly. Something about the hallway felt frozen, like time had stopped after too much sadness. Mrs. Green continued walking, pointing out rooms and rules as she went. David followed from a distance, pretending to tighten a pipe near the stairwell. He kept listening, pretending not to care. But he did. When the tour ended, Maya was taken back to the kitchen where she met Henry, the cook. He was cheerful and talkative, a warm contrast to the cold silence of the rest of the house. They exchanged polite smiles. Henry asked, "So first day nerves?" Maya chuckled softly. "A little." David, nearby fixing a faucet, watched her from the corner of his eye. He noticed something rare. Maya asked about Ethan's favorite foods instead of what problems he caused. "Does he have any snacks he likes?" she asked. Henry smiled. "Applesauce. He loves it." David made a note in his mind. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to understand. That was new. Later that afternoon, Maya was escorted outside to see the backyard garden, a wide green space where the sunlight hit the windows softly. As they walked, David caught up quietly with Mrs. Green. "What do you think of her?" he asked, still pretending to be a plumber checking pipes near the fence. Mrs. Green adjusted her glasses. "She seems decent." "She's not fake. She asks the right questions." David nodded slowly. He didn't say much, but inside he was already thinking about what he'd seen. Maybe, just maybe, this young woman was different. Back inside, Maya thanked Mrs. Green for the interview and said she hoped to hear back soon. David stood nearby pretending to wipe his hands on a cloth. Maya gave him a polite smile before leaving, thinking he was just another worker. She didn't know he was the man who would decide her future. As the front door closed behind her, David stayed in the hall, still wearing the same plain work shirt. He leaned on the mop handle and stared at the door for a long time. Something about her words and calmness stayed in his head. For the first time in years, he felt a small spark of hope. He didn't know why, but something told him this woman might be the one to reach his son. The next morning, the sun broke through the mist over the trees. A car pulled up the driveway. Maya stepped out, wearing a clean uniform and holding a small bag. Her first official day had begun. Mrs. Green met her at the door. "Don't rush things," she said gently. "Today you'll only watch him. Nothing more." Maya nodded, clutching her notebook. She had no idea that behind the walls, the mansion's plumber was watching too, waiting to see what she would do next. Maya's first official morning at the Whitmore estate began in silence. She wore her new uniform, light grey with white trim, and carried a small bag that held just a few items: a notebook, coloured pencils, and a small yellow toy duck she'd kept since her first babysitting job. It was her quiet little charm, something that reminded her that even small things could make a difference. Mrs. Green met her at the front door and wasted no time. "Today you'll only watch him," she said, walking briskly toward the stairs. "Do not try to touch him. Do not call his name suddenly. Just watch and learn." Maya nodded, adjusting her grip on the bag. "I understand." Her voice was steady, but her palms were damp. They walked up the wide staircase to the second floor, where sunlight spilled across polished floors. Mrs. Green stopped at a cream-colored door near the end of the hallway. "This is Ethan's room," she said softly. "He's usually quiet. Don't expect much." Then, without another word, she opened the door. Inside, the air felt still, almost sacred. Ethan sat by the tall window, a thin beam of light touching his hair. He was small for his age, sitting in a wheelchair, his hands occupied with a red spinning toy that caught the light as it turned. He moved it over and over, mumbling softly to himself, lost in his own rhythm. He didn't glance up when Maya entered. For a moment she stood frozen near the door, unsure how to begin. Then she took a quiet breath and slowly sat on the carpet a few feet away, careful not to startle him. Her hands stayed in her lap, open and still. She pulled out her notebook and began to draw. A small house, a tree beside it, a tiny sun in the corner. Her pencil moved lightly, the scratching sound faint and even. She didn't speak, didn't hum loudly, didn't try to fill the silence. She simply existed there, letting Ethan know someone was present without pressing closer. Minutes passed. The spinning toy clicked, 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 and then slowed. Ethan's fingers paused. He didn't turn his head completely, but the rhythm of his movement changed. Maya kept drawing, pretending not to notice. Then she began to hum softly, slow, warm, and steady. It wasn't a tune he'd know, just a sound meant to feel safe. The boy didn't speak, but he didn't move away either. His head tilted slightly in her direction, his eyes flickering toward her notebook for half a second. Outside the door, David Whitmore stood holding a wrench and a bucket. He was supposed to be checking the pipes along the upstairs hallway, but instead he found himself staring through the narrow glass opening in the door. From his spot he could see everything. Maya sitting quietly on the floor, Ethan motionless by the window, sunlight scattered between them. He'd seen dozens of caregivers before, and every one of them had made the same mistake. They'd rushed in, talking loudly, waving toys in the boy's face, trying to get quick results. Ethan had always shut down or screamed, but this time was different. Maya said nothing. She just let the moment be. And somehow that simple silence felt louder than any therapy session David had paid for. He gripped the wrench tighter in his hand and stayed hidden behind the door. His plan had been to test this new maid, to watch, to judge, and then decide if she was another fraud. But now, watching her, he wasn't sure who was being tested anymore. Maya finished her drawing of the house and turned to a new page. This time she began sketching a toy that looked exactly like Ethan's red spinner. The spinning in his hand slowed again. He didn't speak, but he looked at her paper for a long moment. When she noticed, she made the drawing a little larger so he could see it better, and then she colored the edges softly in red. Still, she didn't look up. She wanted him to decide if he wanted to keep watching or not. After a while, she reached into her bag and took out a small piece of modeling clay. Her fingers worked quietly, rolling it into a tiny round ball, and then shaping it into a little dog. She set it on the carpet beside her notebook, not too close to him. She didn't offer it, didn't move it toward him, just left it there. Ethan's head moved again. His fingers stopped spinning the toy. He looked at the clay dog for several seconds before slowly reaching out. His fingertips brushed the little figure once, twice. Then he pulled back his hand and returned to his toy. It was a moment that lasted no more than a few seconds, but Maya's chest swelled with quiet relief. It was contact, gentle, small, but real. David saw it too. From the hallway his breath caught. He'd never seen Ethan do that before. Every other caretaker had failed to get that close without tears or screaming, and this young woman had done it by doing almost nothing at all. He turned away from the door and leaned against the wall, pretending to tighten a pipe that didn't need fixing. His heart was beating faster than he liked to admit. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Maya stayed where she was, humming sometimes, drawing sometimes. When Mrs. Green brought her a sandwich and a glass of water around noon, Maya whispered a soft thank you and stayed sitting on the floor while she ate. Ethan glanced at her once or twice, but didn't seem disturbed by her presence. By late afternoon, a small change appeared again. Ethan adjusted his wheelchair slightly, something Mrs. Green had said he almost never did on his own. He didn't push Maya away. He didn't cry. He simply stayed. For Maya, that was progress enough. Before leaving the room, she placed the little clay dog on a nearby shelf where Ethan could see it whenever he wanted. Then she stood up slowly, careful not to make noise, and gave a small smile in his direction before walking out. He didn't look at her, but he also didn't turn away. In the hallway, she passed David, who was kneeling by the baseboard with a wrench in hand. "Afternoon," she said politely. He looked up, startled for a moment, then nodded. "Afternoon." To her, he was just the quiet plumber who kept to himself. To him, she was becoming something he didn't yet have words for. That night, after the house had gone quiet, David sat in the empty sitting room. The fire was out, the lights dim. He thought of his son's still face, his rare calmness, and the tiny clay dog sitting on the shelf. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd seen in years. He looked down at his work clothes, the smell of metal and dust on his hands. For the first time in a long time, the disguise didn't feel like protection, it felt like a wall. He stared into the quiet room and whispered to himself, "She might be the one." The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds above the Whitmore estate, spreading light across the garden and into the tall windows of the mansion. Maya had begun to find a rhythm to her days. She started early before most of the staff arrived, so she could have quiet moments to prepare Ethan's room, open the curtains, and make sure his favorite toys were within reach. Every small detail mattered to her now. Ethan still didn't speak, but his eyes had started to move more. He looked at things, at sounds, at light. It wasn't direct eye contact, but it was something. And for Maya, every tiny change was worth everything. That afternoon, Mrs. Green assigned her to tidy up the backyard garden near Ethan's window. The air smelled fresh after a light rain. Maya put on gloves and carried a broom to sweep fallen leaves from the path. The garden was peaceful, a mix of stone paths, trimmed bushes, and small white flowers near the fence. While bending down to pick up a few sticks, something caught her attention on the window ledge. A small, dull shape half covered in dust. Curious, she stepped closer. It was an old seashell, round and worn, the kind you find at the edge of the ocean. It didn't look decorative. It looked real. Maya brushed off the dirt with her gloved hand. It was rough but beautiful, its spirals catching bits of light. She turned it over and smiled faintly. It felt like something forgotten but still alive. When she looked up, she saw Ethan through the window. He was inside, sitting in his wheelchair, turning his red spinner, just like always. He hadn't noticed her yet. Maya hesitated for a second, then decided to take the shell inside. In the hallway, she crossed paths with David. He was crouched under a sink, tightening a valve. She smiled politely as she passed. "Morning," he nodded, pretending to be busy. "Morning." When she was gone, he looked up just in time to see the seashell in her hand. Something about it made his chest tighten, though he didn't yet understand why. Inside Ethan's room, the boy sat quietly as always. Maya entered gently. No sudden movement, no words. She walked over to the small table near his chair and set the seashell down. It made a soft sound as it touched the wood. Then she sat cross-legged on the carpet, just far enough to give him space. Ethan didn't react at first. He kept spinning the toy, humming softly. Minutes passed. Then his eyes drifted, slowly, uncertainly, toward the shell. His humming stopped. He reached out with one hand and touched it. For a few seconds he just held it still, feeling the texture under his fingers. Then, in a movement so gentle it almost didn't seem real, he lifted it to his ear. Maya froze. She didn't speak or move. She just watched. Ethan sat completely still, the seashell pressed against his ear. His lips moved, but no words came. Then, just for a moment, he smiled. It wasn't big or long, but it was real. Maya felt her eyes sting. That one tiny smile meant more than any progress report or test could ever say. What she didn't know was that David had stopped working outside the room. Through the small glass pane in the door, he saw everything. His breath caught in his throat as he watched his son smile for the first time in years. The sight was both beautiful and painful. He knew that shell. He remembered it vividly. It had once belonged to Laura, his late wife. She'd collected seashells on a beach trip before Ethan was born. After she died, David had placed one on the window ledge, too broken to move it. It had sat there ever since, forgotten by everyone, except now his son. David leaned against the wall, eyes wet, pretending to wipe his hands with a cloth. He couldn't let anyone see his face right now. Inside, Ethan was still holding the shell, pressing it against his ear. He seemed calm, focused, almost comforted. Maya sat quietly, watching him breathe slower, steadier. She didn't understand why the object meant so much, but she could see its power. She whispered, "It's okay, Ethan. You can hold it as long as you like." For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan kept the shell beside him. Every time he felt restless or started to rock in his chair, Maya would gently point to it, and he'd hold it again. Each time it calmed him. Later that day, Mrs. Green came in after hearing a noise. She stopped when she saw Ethan sitting quietly with the shell in his hands. Her eyes softened. "He's never sat that still before," she said quietly. Maya just nodded. "He likes this," she whispered. Mrs. Green smiled faintly before leaving the room. Down the hallway, David walked toward the back door, pretending to check the pipes again. He couldn't stop thinking about the shell, about how something so simple had done what years of expensive therapy couldn't. He felt an ache deep inside, the kind that comes when memory and gratitude mix with guilt. He realized that in all his fear and grief, he'd never given Ethan a chance to feel comfort from the world, only protection from it. And this woman, this quiet stranger, had just changed that. In the following days, Maya made sure the shell stayed close to Ethan. She didn't push it on him. Sometimes he ignored it. Sometimes he reached for it himself. She began using it gently, like a signal before moments that usually scared him. Before brushing his hair, she'd show him the shell. Before bath time, the same. It became a message. "You're safe," Ethan seemed to understand. He'd pick it up, hold it close, and breathe slowly. No tantrums, no screams, no tears. Just peace. Maya didn't know that the shell was tied to something much deeper, a memory of a mother Ethan never knew. To her, it was just a lucky find that brought a little bit of quiet into his world. But to David, who watched silently from the shadows, it was a sign that the past wasn't gone. It had found a new way to live through kindness. That night, after everyone went to bed, David walked into the garden alone. The air was cool and the moonlight touched the glass windows of the house. He stopped near the ledge where the shell had once sat. He looked up at Ethan's window and saw the faint glow of a night lamp inside. He whispered softly, "She found it, Laura. She found the one thing you left behind." His voice trembled as he spoke. But for the first time in years, he smiled. That night, a quiet rain tapped against the windows of the Whitmore estate. The house had fallen into its usual silence, but something inside had shifted. For the first time in years, Ethan slept peacefully. The small seashell sat on the table beside him, glowing faintly under the soft lamplight. Maya checked on him once before heading to her own room. She didn't know why the shell mattered so much, but she knew it did. It had given Ethan comfort, something all the therapy, structure, and medication hadn't. Down the hall, David walked alone toward the service area. His hands were still stained from the day's work, his clothes smelling faintly of metal and dust. He wasn't thinking about leaks or pipes now. He was thinking about how his son had smiled, how the quiet humming of that young woman had filled a room he once thought lifeless. He leaned against the wall and exhaled deeply. For years he had watched people come and go, promising miracles, offering advice, but leaving behind only disappointment. Now, for the first time, something real had begun. The next morning, Maya was preparing breakfast in the main kitchen when Mrs. Green entered. She was calmer than usual, her tone less sharp. "Ethan slept through the whole night," she said. "That's new," Maya smiled. "That's wonderful. Maybe he's finally resting better." Mrs. Green hesitated, then added, "Whatever you did, keep doing it." Maya laughed softly. "I think it's just the shell." Mrs. Green looked puzzled. "The shell?" Maya nodded. "I found it in the garden near his window. He seems to like it." Mrs. Green raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's strange. I've seen that thing out there for years. Didn't think anyone even noticed it." David, who was pretending to fix the plumbing under the sink, froze. His wrench stopped turning. He listened carefully without looking up. Maya continued, "It's special to him. I can't explain it, but it helps." Mrs. Green shrugged. "If it works, I won't question it." Lord knows that boy deserves peace." She left the room, and David sat quietly for a few moments, pretending to sort his tools, but his eyes were distant. Later that day, Ethan had a small outburst. It started with a sound, a vacuum in the hallway, too loud and too sudden. He flinched, then began to rock back and forth in his chair, hitting his hands against the armrests. His breathing grew sharp, his voice rising into short, panicked cries. Mrs. Green started toward the room, but Maya was already there. "Ethan," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "It's okay, it's just noise. You're safe." He didn't hear her. His world had shrunk into fear and confusion. Then she spotted the shell on the table. Without thinking, she grabbed it and gently placed it in his hands. For a moment, he didn't react. His fingers twitched, unsure. Then his eyes shifted. He looked at the shell, lifted it to his ear, and stopped crying. His breathing slowed. The tension left his shoulders. The storm inside him faded. Maya stayed beside him on the floor, her own breath slowing with his. "You're safe," she whispered again. "I'm here." Ethan didn't speak, but he looked at her, the first true glance she'd ever received from him. It was small, fleeting, but filled with trust. In the hallway, David stood frozen. He had rushed to the sound of Ethan's cries, but now he couldn't move. He saw his son calm in Maya's presence, something he had never been able to do himself. The scene pierced through him, the shell, the silence, the way Maya's hand stayed close without forcing touch. For a moment, David felt both awe and pain. He had spent years trying to fix his son, but she had reached him by simply being gentle. He turned away before anyone saw his face. His eyes were wet again. That evening, while Maya sat reading quietly in the sitting room, Mrs. Green joined her for tea. "You've been good for this house," Mrs. Green said after a moment. "It's been quiet for so long. You've brought something back." Maya smiled modestly. "I think Ethan's just learning to trust." "Maybe," Mrs. Green replied. "Or maybe the house finally has someone who listens." In another part of the estate, David stood at the window of his private study, staring at the garden below. The rain from the night before had washed the air clean. The world looked brighter, fresher. On his desk, a small photo of Laura lay tucked inside a book, her soft eyes, her gentle smile. He picked it up and whispered, "He smiled today, Laura. He held your shell." His voice cracked as he said it. He hadn't spoken to that photo in years, but tonight it felt right. Over the next few days, Maya began to notice patterns. Whenever Ethan grew anxious or tired, he would glance toward the shell. It became his anchor, his way to feel safe. She kept it nearby but never forced it. Sometimes she'd hum while he held it, and he'd sway gently to the rhythm. Henry, the cook, noticed too. "He's quieter these days," he said one afternoon while handing Maya a cup of tea. She smiled. "He's finding his calm," Henry chuckled. "Or maybe he's found his person." Maya blushed slightly. "I don't know about that," but she did. Somewhere inside, she knew they were forming something real, a silent bond built not from words, but from patience. David continued watching from the background, still in disguise. Every time Maya walked by, she greeted him kindly. Sometimes she even brought him a glass of water or asked if he needed help carrying tools. He'd smile back faintly, careful not to reveal too much. But inside, his heart was changing. He started to realize that the lie, the disguise, was becoming harder to carry. He wanted to thank her, to tell her who he really was, but he couldn't yet. He told himself he had to wait, that the time wasn't right. But the truth was simpler. He was afraid that if she knew the truth, she'd see him as another rich man hiding behind walls. Afraid that she'd walk away. So he stayed silent, fixing imaginary leaks while watching the woman who had brought warmth back to his home. As the sun set that evening, Maya sat beside Ethan while he held the shell. He pressed it to his ear, eyes half closed, his lips curved in a soft, wordless smile. Maya whispered, "You're doing great, Ethan. I'm proud of you." Outside the door, David closed his eyes and smiled too. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel cold. Days turned into weeks, and something gentle began to take root inside the Whitmore estate. The air no longer felt heavy. The sound of quiet laughter sometimes floated through the halls, mostly from the sitting room where Ethan and Maya spent their afternoons. Even Mrs. Green, who used to walk with her chin high and her heart closed, had softened. Henry started baking cookies more often, saying he liked hearing good noise in the house again. Maya and Ethan had fallen into a simple, calm routine. In the mornings, she'd draw while he watched. In the afternoons, she'd sit on the floor beside him with his shell and hum slow songs. Sometimes he joined in by tapping his finger against the armrest of his wheelchair in rhythm. Small things, simple things, but they meant everything. David noticed it all. He still wore his plain work clothes, still carried his tool bag like a real plumber, but lately he wasn't fixing much of anything. Instead, he stayed near the rooms where Maya and Ethan were. He'd listen from the hallway or peek through a doorway, pretending to check for leaks. Every day the house changed a little more. The staff smiled more. The sound of footsteps no longer echoed with loneliness. It felt alive again. One afternoon, while cleaning the service hallway, Maya saw David tightening a valve near the wall. She decided to sit nearby for a minute, taking a short break. "You work a lot," she said. David didn't look up. "Just part of the job." "You're always fixing something," she added. "Does it ever end?" He chuckled softly. "Not really. There's always something that leaks." Maya smiled. "I guess that's true for people too." David looked up for a second, surprised by her words. He wanted to ask what she meant, but she continued before he could. "Sometimes people look fine on the outside," she said, "but inside something's broken. They just hide it better." David stayed quiet, pretending to clean a pipe, but her words hit deep. She didn't know it, but she had just described him perfectly. That became the first of many small conversations between them. Maya would stop and talk to him whenever she had a free moment. Never long, never loud, but real. She asked about the house, about how long he'd worked there if he liked it. David kept his answers simple. He said he liked fixing things because it gave him control, because things that were broken could be made whole again if you worked hard enough. Maya smiled softly. That's a good way to look at it. Over time, their talks grew a little longer. Sometimes they'd share a joke. Sometimes they'd just sit quietly while she folded laundry or polished the railing. David wasn't sure why, but he found comfort in her presence. It wasn't about attraction or anything like that. It was about peace. She didn't demand, didn't pry, didn't treat him like a worker beneath her. She talked to him like an equal. No one had done that in years. One late afternoon, while they were both in the service room, Maya opened up more than usual. The window was open, and the soft smell of rain drifted in. She was folding towels when she said, "You know, I didn't plan to work in a place like this. I thought I'd go to college, maybe study child development. But life had other ideas." David looked up from the pipes he was pretending to check. "You still could," he said quietly. She gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe someday. But classes cost money, and right now I need to earn." David hesitated, then said, "You'd be good at it." Maya paused, caught off guard. "You think so?" He nodded. "You have something that can't be taught. Patience, kindness. Most people don't." For a moment, neither spoke. Maya folded the last towel and placed it on the shelf. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." David only nodded, afraid that if he said more, his voice would shake. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake thinking about her words, her calm voice, her steady hands. He thought about Ethan's laugh that afternoon when Maya had drawn a silly dog on her notebook and made the toy bark. He'd never heard his son laugh like that before. But with those thoughts came guilt. He knew this peace was built on a lie. Every time she smiled at him, she saw a plumber, not the man who owned the mansion and paid her salary. He had created this role to test her, to make sure she wasn't like the others, but now it didn't feel like a test anymore. It felt like a trap he'd built for himself. Still, he couldn't bring himself to stop. Not yet. The next afternoon, Maya was sitting in the garden with Ethan. The air smelled like fresh grass and sunlight. Ethan had the shell in his lap and was humming softly, matching the tune Maya made. David watched them from a distance, standing behind the tall hedges with a wrench in his hand he didn't need. He watched Maya talk to Ethan like he was any other boy, asking gentle questions, giving him time to respond. She didn't rush him or fill the silence with pity. And when Ethan made a small sound, she didn't correct him or flinch. She just smiled and said, "That's wonderful." David turned away, eyes wet. He'd spent years waiting for something like this, for someone to look at his son and see more than a condition. He leaned on the tool cart and closed his eyes, whispering, "Thank you." The words weren't meant for anyone to hear. Later that evening, while Maya cleaned the hallway near Ethan's room, she found David again. He was wiping the baseboard this time, lost in thought. She smiled. "You know, I think you like this hallway more than any other part of the house." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. It's quiet here." She nodded. "Quiet is nice. Sometimes silence says everything." For a moment they both stood, there without speaking, the soft sound of Ethan's music box playing faintly from the next room. It was a peaceful kind of silence, the kind that felt shared, not empty. When Maya walked away, David stayed behind a few seconds longer, his gaze following her. He realized then that the quiet inside him didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt alive. A week later, a soft chill filled the air around the Whitmore estate. The trees outside had begun to turn gold, and sunlight drifted through the tall windows in quiet streams. Inside, everything looked the same, shining floors, perfect furniture. But to Maya, the mansion no longer felt intimidating. It felt alive, with sounds of footsteps, laughter, and Ethan's faint hums echoing through the halls. That afternoon, Mrs. Green handed Maya a list of chores. "The study needs dusting," she said. "No one's touched it in years." Maya nodded. "Of course." As Mrs. Green walked away, Maya took a breath and pushed open the heavy door to David's private study. The room smelled of books and old paper. Shelves lined every wall, filled with thick volumes and framed photographs. Dust shimmered in the sunlight that filtered through the curtains. Maya moved carefully, wiping the surfaces with a soft cloth. Each object looked like it carried a story: pens, papers, and the faint scent of cologne that hadn't faded. While she dusted one of the upper shelves, she noticed a small frame pushed far behind a row of encyclopedias. The glass was cloudy with age. Curious, she pulled it out and wiped it gently. Behind the layer of dust was a photograph of a young woman, smiling, with kind eyes and dark hair that framed her face. She couldn't have been older than her late 20s. Maya froze. The woman looked like Ethan. The same gentle eyes, the same faint sadness in the smile. Something deep in Maya's chest stirred. She didn't know who the woman was, but instinct told her this photo mattered. She hesitated, then tucked the frame under her arm and left the room quietly. When she reached Ethan's room, the boy was by the window spinning his red toy. He looked calm. Maya entered slowly and sat on the floor as always, a safe distance away. "Hey, Ethan," she said softly. "I want to show you something." Her voice was calm, almost a whisper. She placed the photo frame on the floor where he could see it. At first, Ethan didn't notice. The toy kept turning, clicking softly, but then the sound stopped. His eyes moved toward the photo. He looked at it for a long moment, expression blank at first, then thoughtful. Very slowly, his hand lowered the spinner to his lap. He stared at the picture again, this time longer, and reached forward with trembling fingers. Maya held her breath as his fingertips touched the glass. He didn't say anything, but his lips parted slightly as though he was about to. A faint sound came out, small, broken, almost like a sigh. It wasn't a word, but it wasn't nothing either. Tears filled Maya's eyes as she whispered, "It's okay, Ethan. You're safe." He kept his hand on the photo for nearly a full minute, staring at the woman's face. Then, without being told, he looked toward Maya, his gaze lingering for a heartbeat longer than usual. Maya didn't know what it meant, but she felt something shift inside the room, something powerful but quiet. She carefully picked up the photo and set it on the small table near his chair, next to the seashell. Ethan didn't look away. Later, while walking through the service room, Maya found Mrs. Green folding linens. She held up the photo and asked softly, "Mrs. Green, who is this?" Mrs. Green glanced up, then froze for a second. Her voice lowered. "That's Mrs. Whitmore, David's wife. She passed away during childbirth." Maya's breath caught. "Ethan's mother?" Mrs. Green nodded slowly. "Yes, he never knew her." Maya felt her throat tighten. She thanked Mrs. Green quietly and left, clutching the photo to her chest. That night she sat alone in her small room, staring at the image. Now it made sense. Why Ethan clung to the shell, why he seemed drawn to it. It was the only link he had to his mother. He didn't remember her, but he must have felt something familiar in that object. Maya wiped her eyes. "You've been missing her all this time," she whispered, as if Ethan could hear her from across the hall. The next morning she placed the photo back on the table near the shell. She didn't mention it to Ethan again, but she noticed how he would sometimes glance at it during the day. He didn't touch it every time, but when he did, his movements became softer, calmer. Even Mrs. Green noticed. "He's quieter these days," she said. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Maya smiled, but inside she knew it wasn't her doing. It was his mother's presence, lingering through the objects she'd once touched. All she had done was bring them back into his reach. That evening, while Ethan played with his spinner and shell, Maya sat nearby sketching. She drew the photo of Laura from memory, the same eyes, the same warmth. Ethan looked over once, curious. She turned the sketchbook toward him with a gentle smile. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Ethan didn't speak, but he nodded once. Just once, but it was enough. Down the hall, David was pacing near the kitchen when Mrs. Green approached him. "Did you know," she said softly, "that picture of your wife is back in the boys' room?" David froze. "What?" "She must have found it in the study, put it there herself." Mrs. Green waited for him to respond, but he didn't. His face went pale, his jaw tight. "I see," he said quietly. Then he walked away. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, David went to Ethan's room. The door was slightly open, the faint sound of Ethan's soft breathing inside. On the table sat the photo, the shell, and the small clay dog. He stood there silently, staring at them. The photo of Laura looked the same as always, her eyes warm, her smile patient. But beside it sat proof that something new had begun. The shell, the symbol of connection. It hit him then. His son, who had never known his mother, had found a piece of her through the kindness of another woman. David stepped back and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know who the words were for, Laura, Maya, or maybe both. But he meant them with every piece of his heart. It happened on a night when the sky cracked open with thunder. Rain pounded against the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, and wind whistled through the trees. Most of the staff had gone to bed early. Only a few dim lights glowed through the hallways, flickering every time lightning struck. Maya was in the main kitchen, sipping a glass of water before heading to her room. When she heard it, a scream, sharp, high-pitched, terrified. She dropped the glass, water splashing across the counter, and ran upstairs. At the end of the upstairs hallway, 2 staff members stood frozen outside Ethan's room, unsure of what to do. Inside, the noise was unbearable. Thuds, cries, the sound of something hitting metal. Maya didn't hesitate. She pushed past them and rushed inside. Ethan was in full panic. His small body thrashed in the wheelchair, hands striking the sides again and again. His face was red, streaked with tears, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Each thunderclap outside made him scream louder. The shell had fallen to the floor. Maya's heart pounded. She moved quickly, kneeling beside him. "Ethan!" she called gently. "It's okay. I'm here." He didn't respond. His body was locked in terror, his eyes unfocused. Without thinking, she grabbed the shell, placed it into his trembling hands, and wrapped her arms around him. At first he fought her. He kicked, pushed, tried to pull away. But Maya didn't let go. Her arms held firm but gentle. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're safe, baby. You're safe." Rain hammered the windows. Thunder rolled again, shaking the glass. Ethan's cries broke into sobs, his whole body shaking against hers. Maya held him tighter, pressing her cheek to his hair. She whispered over and over, "You're not alone. You're safe." Her clothes were soaked with his tears. She felt his heartbeat racing under her palm, and then, slowly, something began to change. His hands, which had been striking the armrests, stopped. His breathing, which had come in short, painful gasps, started to slow. The shell rested between his palms. He lifted it shakily to his ear. The moment his skin touched the cool surface, his crying softened. His head dropped against her shoulder. The thunder outside rumbled again, but this time he didn't scream. He just held the shell and listened. Maya felt his weight relax in her arms. The room went quiet except for the rain. She stayed there, kneeling, holding him close as if her arms were the only thing keeping the storm away. At the door, David stood frozen. He had come running when he heard the screams, still dressed in his old plumber's jacket. But what he saw made his breath stop completely. His son, his fragile, unreachable boy, was silent, calm, asleep against the shoulder of a woman who had entered their lives only weeks ago. David didn't move. He couldn't. The image hit him harder than any storm ever could. All these years he had built walls around himself and his son, keeping everyone away. And now, right before his eyes, those walls had finally fallen. Maya didn't notice him at first. She was still holding Ethan, her face streaked with tears but steady. Then, in a quiet, broken voice, Ethan whispered something. It was one word, barely audible. "Shell." Maya's eyes widened. Her arms tightened around him, and tears spilled freely down her cheeks. He had spoken. David stepped backward, one hand pressed over his mouth, his heart aching in his chest. That single word carried more meaning than 1,000 sentences. It wasn't just sound, it was understanding, connection. Maya didn't say anything. She just kept holding him. Her voice was gone, replaced by quiet sobs. Ethan's breathing slowed, his body limp now in exhaustion and comfort. When David finally entered the room, the floor creaked under his boots. Maya looked up, startled, her face pale in the dim light. He stood there in silence, dripping from the rain, his eyes wide and glassy. "He's never done that before," he said quietly. Maya nodded, her voice trembling. "I know." David stepped closer, kneeling beside the wheelchair. He touched Ethan's small hand, the one still clutching the shell. Ethan didn't wake. He just sighed softly, resting deeper into sleep. Maya looked at David, not understanding why he seemed so shaken, but she didn't ask. Something told her not to. The air felt too sacred, too heavy to fill with questions. David finally stood, his eyes lingering on his son's peaceful face. He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Thank you," he said softly. Maya wiped her eyes and nodded. He just needed someone. They walked out together, side by side. The thunder had quieted now, replaced by steady rain. Maya's steps were slow, her body drained. David's hands trembled slightly, hidden inside his pockets. In the hallway, the silence between them said everything. David wanted to tell her the truth, to say that he wasn't a plumber, that he was Ethan's father, that she had just given him back the one thing he thought he'd lost forever. But the words wouldn't come. He just looked at her once, his eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, something he didn't dare name. "Good night," he whispered. She nodded faintly. "Good night." When she returned to her small room, Maya sat on the bed, her hands still trembling. The moment replayed in her head, the shell, the storm, Ethan's voice. She could still feel the warmth of his small body in her arms. He had spoken. Her heart ached, but it was a beautiful ache, full of hope. Down the hallway, David stood at the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. He pressed a hand against it and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. Not out of grief, but out of relief. That single word, shell, had broken more than Ethan's silence. It had broken his. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a washed sky and a fresh smell of rain-soaked earth. The mansion felt still, but not heavy, like it was holding its breath after a night that had changed everything. Maya woke early. Her body ached, her eyes were tired, but her heart was full. She could still feel Ethan's warmth from the night before, his trembling body pressed against her, the sound of that one word echoing in her mind. Shell. It had been so small, but to her it felt as powerful as a shout. She stepped quietly into the main kitchen where Henry was already preparing breakfast. "Morning, Miss Williams," he said with a smile. "Rough night?" Maya nodded, rubbing her arm. "You could say that, but he's better now." Henry poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "You did good," he said simply. "That boy trusts you." Maya looked down at the cup, her throat tight. "I hope so." Upstairs, David was in Ethan's room. He had come early, still in his usual work clothes, though today he couldn't bring himself to pick up a single tool. Ethan was already awake, sitting by the window. The boy looked peaceful, eyes bright, face soft. David stood near the doorway, watching his son in silence. Ethan turned his head slightly when Maya entered with a tray. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. She set down the tray, porridge, a spoon, and apple juice, and smiled when he gave a small hum in response. David stayed where he was, pretending to sweep, though the broom barely moved. He watched as Maya fed Ethan slowly, carefully, speaking to him in a gentle rhythm. "Here comes the spoon," she teased playfully. "Open up." To his surprise, Ethan did. He ate without protest, and even giggled once when Maya made a funny face. David felt a lump in his throat. It was such a simple moment, a child laughing at breakfast, but to him it was everything he had prayed for. Then it happened. Ethan paused mid-bite, staring at Maya. He looked at her face for a long time, his eyes wide and curious. Then, in a soft but clear voice, he said, "I wish you're my mommy." The room went completely silent. The spoon in Maya's hand froze. Her heart skipped. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it, but Ethan repeated, slower this time, "I wish you're my mommy." Her breath caught in her chest. The words hit her like lightning, gentle but powerful, cutting through the air. Behind her, David dropped the broom. It clattered loudly against the floor, the sound echoing in the quiet room. He turned away quickly, hiding his face, his throat tight. Maya blinked fast, fighting tears. She forced a small smile and reached out to touch Ethan's hand. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have such a big heart." Ethan smiled, satisfied, and returned to his porridge like nothing had happened. But Maya sat there frozen, unable to move for a few seconds. She could feel her chest ache, not from sadness, but from something much deeper, a love she hadn't planned for. Her job had started as a way to make a living. Now it felt like something sacred. David stood near the window, his back to them. He clenched his hands tightly at his sides, trying to stay quiet. His son's voice echoed in his head. "I wish you're my mommy." He had dreamed of hearing words like that, but not like this, not while hiding behind a lie. He walked out of the room without a word. Maya didn't notice until a few moments later. When she turned, he was gone. Downstairs, David stepped out into the backyard garden. The grass was wet from the rain and the air was cool. He sat on the wooden bench near the old oak tree, the same spot where Laura used to sit reading on sunny days. He looked up at the grey sky, his heart heavy and light all at once. He remembered how Laura had spoken to their unborn child, whispering dreams into the growing life inside her. He remembered how she had said, "He'll be kind, David. He'll need love more than anything." And now, years later, that same child had looked at a stranger and called her Mommy. David didn't feel anger. He felt grief, relief, and gratitude tangled into one. Somehow, the love that had been lost in their home had found its way back, through Maya. She had given Ethan something even he couldn't. Back upstairs, Maya finished feeding Ethan. He was calm now, his smile soft. After the last bite, he leaned his head against her arm, breathing quietly. Maya froze for a second, then let him rest there. Her hand moved slowly to his hair, brushing it aside. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stayed there, letting him feel safe. Her eyes drifted toward the photo of Laura on the nearby table. She smiled faintly through her tears. "You raised a wonderful boy," she whispered under her breath. In her heart, she didn't feel like a replacement, just a bridge, someone meant to fill the quiet spaces left behind. Later that afternoon, when David returned to the house, everything was calm again. He passed by Ethan's room and saw Maya tidying the table. Ethan was watching her with a soft smile. David stopped in the doorway, his face unreadable. Maya looked up, caught his gaze, and gave him a small nod. He returned it, but neither spoke. Something had changed between them, something invisible but real. That night, David sat alone in his private study. He pulled open an old drawer that hadn't been touched in years. Inside were letters, photographs, and a small envelope in Laura's handwriting. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a note Laura had written before Ethan was born. "If you ever feel lost, remember that love can't be replaced. It can only grow." David sat there for a long time, the words blurring through his tears. He looked toward the ceiling and whispered, "He's doing okay, Laura. He's really doing okay." In the quiet that followed, something inside him loosened. The fear, the guilt, the loneliness, all of it began to fade. For the first time in years, he felt peace. The days after Ethan's tender words felt quiet but heavy. Something had changed between Maya and David, though nothing was said aloud. She still cared for Ethan with her usual patience, but her heart carried a strange unease. It was the way David moved through the house, how the staff seemed to stop talking when he entered, how no one ever gave him orders. Even Mrs. Green treated him with quiet respect that didn't match his role as a plumber. One afternoon, while dusting the private study, Maya found an old family photo behind a stack of books. Laura Whitmore smiled warmly in the picture, holding a baby boy, and standing beside her, dressed in a dark suit, was David. Maya froze. The truth hit her like cold water. He wasn't a plumber. He was the owner. He was Ethan's father. That evening, she found him alone in the service hallway, pretending to wipe a window. Her voice trembled. "You're not really who you said you were, are you?" David stopped. The cloth in his hand fell to the floor. He didn't lie. "No," he whispered. "I'm not." He told her everything, how he had lost his wife, how every caregiver before her had failed, how he had pretended to be a worker so he could see who truly cared. Maya listened quietly, her face pale. "You watched me like a test," she said softly. "It wasn't a test," he said, voice breaking. "It was fear. I needed to be sure." Tears welled in her eyes. "You didn't need to test me. I wasn't here for you. I was here for Ethan." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the empty hallway. David leaned against the wall, his heart sinking. He had built this connection on honesty and kindness, or so he thought. Now all she saw was betrayal. Outside, Maya sat in the backyard garden, staring at the wet grass. She wasn't angry, just hurt. She had trusted him, spoken openly, even begun to care. Now every word between them felt heavy with doubt. Still, she couldn't hate him. He was a man broken by loss, doing the only thing he knew to protect his son. That night, the mansion returned to silence. Maya cried quietly in her room while David sat outside Ethan's door, staring at the floor. Neither slept. Neither moved. Both were lost in the same thought. They had found something rare, and now they might lose it. The next morning, sunlight broke gently over the Whitmore estate. David hadn't slept all night. The truth was out, and the house that had finally begun to feel alive again now felt fragile, like a single wrong word could shatter it. Through the window, he saw Maya sitting on a bench in the backyard garden, the same place where she had once found the seashell. She sat still, staring at the flowers swaying in the soft breeze. David walked out slowly, no longer wearing his plumber's clothes. No mask, no tools, just himself. "Maya," he said quietly. She turned her head but didn't speak. "I lied because I was afraid," he said. "I've lost too much. My wife, my trust, myself. But you brought something back to this house, something I thought was gone forever." She looked at him, her eyes tired but calm. "You hurt me, David. You made me feel small, like I was part of some test." He nodded. "You're right, I did. But I'm not asking you to forgive me for lying. I'm asking you to stay. Not as an employee, as family." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she breathed in slowly. "If I stay, it has to be real. No pretending. No more secrets." He swallowed hard. "No more secrets," he promised. Something in her expression softened. "Then yes," she said quietly. "I'll stay." They walked back toward the mansion together, side by side. Through the glass doors, Ethan sat in his wheelchair, watching them from the sitting room window. When he saw Maya, his face lit up. He lifted his small arms toward her, the way a child reaches for home. She rushed forward and hugged him tightly. David stood behind them, emotion flooding his chest. For the first time in years, the sound of laughter filled the room again. The house, once silent and cold, finally felt alive. Weeks passed and peace settled like sunlight in every corner. Ethan made progress. He spoke more words, smiled more often, and loved his lessons with the visiting teacher. Maya began studying special education online, encouraged by David, who worked nearby, always close enough to help, but never in the way. Their days became simple. Morning walks, shared meals, evenings filled with stories and quiet joy. One afternoon, a business visitor paused in the living room, pointing at a new framed photo on the shelf. It showed David, Maya, and Ethan, together, smiling. The man asked, "Who's the lady next to you?" Before David could answer, Ethan stood proudly and said, "She's my heart mommy." The visitor smiled politely, but David's eyes filled with tears. Maya bent down, kissed Ethan's forehead, and whispered, "I love you too." Sunlight poured through the windows, landing on two photos that sat side by side. Laura's serene face, and the new family that had grown in her memory. Between them lay the seashell, gleaming softly, carrying every echo of love, loss, and renewal. And for the first time, the Whitmore house truly felt like home.